My introduction to the field of evolutionary psychology was through a gentleman by the name of Dr. Desmond Morris. Dr. Morris notes that there are over 250 different species of apes and monkeys, all of which are covered with hair, except one, us. He then proceeds to examine the behaviours of the naked ape through a zoologist's eyes. And as a result, we get this wonderfully objective view of the behaviours that have served us well for the 1.5 million years that we have existed as Homo erectus. I have recently finished a book that I believe is the logical extension of this line of thinking. In Hardwired Humans, Andrew O'Keefe brings evolutionary psychology into the workplace. And using the work of the research that he's done on Professor Nigel Nicholson, Dr. Jane Goodall, and also his years of experience as a consultant and as a senior executive to blue chip organisations, Andrew finds that the naked ape is alive and well in today's offices. And in the process, Andrew is able to give us some excellent solutions as to how to deal with some of the most common ills that organisations face. Change, silo behaviour, how to deal with gossip, and of course, leadership. And I'm fortunate enough to be with Andrew here today and to be able to bring you some insights into what it is we can do in the workplace in order to make a place that we spend a large percentage of our time less like a zoo and more like our preferred habitat. So, Andrew O'Keefe, welcome.
Thanks, Rod.
Firstly, I just wanted to start by thanking you for the fantastic work that you've done. As you can see, not only have I read your book, but I've also underlined it, I've dog-eared it, I've written comments of thoughts that have occurred to me. It is enlightening and it is practical as well. So further to my introduction, is there anything that you'd like to add in order to summarise the thesis of the book?
Offices that we find ourselves in today are not our natural habitat. What's happened through the long journey of human history, it's only been the last 250 years with the Industrial Revolution, that's obviously in the Western world, many countries even more recently than that, that we moved from being hunter-gatherer and villagers to move into offices, factories and the like. So we're wired for a different habitat, but the behaviour that served us well on the savannah plains over the millennia are alive and well in today's offices, corridors and meeting rooms.
In the book, you talk about how you've taken many leaders to the zoo and they've observed the chimpanzees in the enclosure. And you've also mentioned that they've been able to draw lots of parallels between what's happening in the chimp enclosure and what happens back at work. What are some of those parallels?
The key insight is that we're a social animal, and it's really by taking people to the zoo and by this comparison with, particularly chimpanzees, because their social structures are so similar to ours. And so leaders very quickly see that their community, like our social structures, are based on family groups. They live within clans of a certain size, or what's known as communities, which links to their brain size as our clan size links to our brain size. Social animals, one of the characteristics of social animals is hierarchy and pecking orders. There's therefore a lot of politics that goes on. One of the key insights into the social dynamics of chimp communities is grooming, which we do in the form of gossip. So most of these 9 instincts that we brought out of the savannah are still existing in these forest social animals, chimpanzees particularly.
You also make some excellent observations about the nature of leadership, of course, how the alpha male rises to the top, how they get to stay there. What are some of the observations that the leaders take away from there?
One of the key insights from particularly Dr. Jane Goodall's work over her 50 years at Gombe in Tanzania is insight into, first of all, how leaders or individual males get to the top job. If we're talking about bonobos, we will talk about alpha females. In a chimp case, it's always alpha males. And it seems to be a personality trait. There's some individuals who have little interest in progressing through the pecking order. They're not prepared to take on the fights and the battles and the politics. But for those who do, they get there through a variety of strategies, including coalitions and politics and sheer contest and display, intimidating others. What's really interesting, the second point would be from her observations, is that the good leaders, we can talk about what they are, the good leaders, they last as leaders for about 10 years. The bullies and the tyrants, they only last as a chimp leader for about 2 years.
You mentioned in your answer that one of the ways to rise to the top is through contest, display, intimidation. So that gets you to the top position, but does that keep you there? What happens? How do you stay at the top?
Part of what then really influences leadership style is the culture of an organisation, which is set, again, through hierarchy and status, through the behaviours of the one or two most powerful people. So that governs then what's expected of the leaders in an organisation, and what are the shared leadership behaviours or expectations, and is it a sort of organisation which expects and clearly communicates constructive leadership styles, or do the bullies and the tyrants get on okay around here? And that's decided by the views and the values of the most powerful people.
I can imagine that there would be some chief executives out there who would say, hang about, Andrew, this tends to dehumanise humans a bit. You know, I'm a bit more evolved than the average monkey in an enclosure. How do you deal with that issue?
It's actually not a question or an issue that comes up. And I wonder if that's because of the way it unfolds when we talk about it and when we take leaders through it, it just seems to make sense. That the behaviour and these 9 instincts explain much of the behaviour that people now recognise. Up until now they didn't have a framework to explain them, and people very quickly move through accepting the explanation of the 9 instincts, and then it's about applying that knowledge.
Now, in the book you talk about how there's a vast body of research that identifies that there are some important numbers to us as humans. There's the number 4, the number 7, and the number 150. How does that work? Tell me about that.
So the 4 comes from our form of grooming being gossip. People will instantly recognise that if they're at a conference, the conference breaks for morning tea, and people are standing around talking, having a cup of tea. And people, when we ask the question, what size groups are people in? People immediately recall, yeah, we're actually in groups of between 2 and 4. And where that comes from is our gossip ratio, courtesy of Professor Dunbar at Oxford, one of his points is that we use our form of language as gossip and grooming. So whereas the chimps can only groom physically, we do it by vocal capability and gossip, sharing social chit-chat. And we have a ratio of 1 speaker to 3 listeners. And so what happens when we're standing around conversing, we will stand in groups of up to 4, but also if a 5th person joins, that breaks the ratio. And one of the 5 will not be connected and break off, or the group of 5 will within 30 seconds break off into groups of 2 and 3. So that's number 4. Number 7 is our family size unit. So our, again, through the long journey of human history, the building block of human societies is family units, and that number is basically about 5 to 9 people. So we have a need to belong intimately, and we carry that forward to work, which is teams being around about that size. And the most important group that I need to feel a sense of identity with at work is my team. And then where the 150 comes from, again from Professor Dunbar, is it relates to our brain size being the clan that we can connect with. If people wrote down the list of acquaintances they have in their life, they're going to come to about 100 to 150 people. And that's our traditional nomadic clan size. The equivalent to chimps, they're not quite as brainy as us. They can't connect with the politics and the dynamics of 150. Their community size in the wild is roughly about 50.
And you said there was some sort of link here with Facebook as well.
Yeah, so when Facebook runs the numbers, which they did for The Economist, of looking at intimate connections, not so much the bragging rights of how many friends you have under contest and display, when they looked at intimate connections of people posting information to each other's profile, then they found support for this small number of intimates in their analysis being about 5 to 6 people.
So I can have my 7 intimate friends on Facebook, I can have the 150 that I communicate with fairly regularly, and so the 500 plus friends is really just status and display. Fantastic. Okay, let's apply some of this wonderfully practical and objective approach to some of the most common ills that we face in organisations. And one that I often come up against, and I'm sure you do too, is the manager, the leader who says, Rod, this is all very well and good. The whole 1 to 7 would be, 1 to 4 would be lovely. I manage 12 people. Not only do I manage 12 people, but I've also got some technical objectives to get as well. I've got to write proposals, liaise with clients, I've got to win the work, etc., etc. What advice do you have for these people?
The advice would be supportive, or at least let's say advice to the organisation is if you're asking a mere mortal human being manager to look after significantly more than 9, and 12's significant, so 12 to 16 people, it's of benefit knowing about human instincts to this organisation to know that that job is designed to be dysfunctional. That's beyond the natural sized group. The symptoms will be that a manager can't possibly support a unit that size. The group will start breaking off into cliques. There will be dysfunction between that group and another, with other groups waiting on output for that group. The group's performance will suffer. And what those managers that you quote will be really revealing is their intuition or knowledge and feeling and experience that their job's undoable. And so for organisations wanting to apply this knowledge, they would first of all design their organisation to be functional, which is to avoid very large teams, but also very small teams. If we humans are in a small team of 1 or 2 people reporting to a manager, 1/1, 1/2 reporting, then that's almost equally dysfunctional because it's not a large enough group to feel a sense of identity and belonging.
I can imagine some CEOs saying, but Rod, 1 per 7, I can't afford that. You've got to be kidding.
The important point would be to know that there are trade-offs. If you fight against human nature, and if you convince yourself that a mere mortal human managing 16 people is okay because you don't want to put in place a supervisory level or extra supervisors, there will be trade-offs, and I can almost guarantee that if senior executives look at units within their organisation that are not performing, where engagement's low, productivity low, where there's dysfunctionality and cliques, they will be either the very large groups, that is way beyond 9 people, or equally the very small groups with 1/1, 1/2 reporting.
So the message there is for CEOs to perhaps be more aware of the intangibles and less conscious of the tangibles.
Well, the natural inclination and fitting where possible with the natural systems, but also if a chief executive convinces themselves that a manager should look after these 16 people, then another option is to invest a lot in the support of that manager. Good systems, good training, good support, maybe secretarial help, whatever it might be. You have to do extraordinary things because you're asking the person to do an unnatural job.
Yes, let's talk about cliques, because this is one of the big bugbears that many leaders have to face on a daily basis is, Rod, I've got so much wastage when my departments don't talk to each other. What can we suggest here?
It adds a natural explanation of that observation, and that observation is that we will bond closer to a group of about 150, given that our organisations are much larger than 150 in many cases. Then it means that we won't connect as one of 10,000 or one of 100,000, and therefore we will bond more intimately with our unit, our department, our geography, which then says for organisations or executives to structure your organisation according to, given that there will be a bond, where do you want the strongest bond to be? And then secondly, to monitor for any destructive competitive rivalries.
Another issue that would be invaluable here is the area of leadership and perhaps more broadly fellowship. So what is it the Hardwired Humans has to offer both me as a leader and also me as a team member?
From a leader's perspective, it's a very empowering message that says it is very natural that in our small groups there be a leader, and then there'd be a village leader and a tribal leader. So it's very empowering for leaders to know that it is natural for them to be in their role. It's also handy to know that there's certain leadership styles that we naturally much prefer, and that is a constructive style rather than the fear-generating tyrannical style. So that's a very important message of one of empowerment of leadership. In terms of, and then also for leaders, there's a message about followership, which is that people much prefer a secure environment where there's healthy relationships amongst team members. And one of the key messages again from Jane Goodall is this sense of social harmony. And that's what really the followers enjoy during the reign of a constructive leader.
What about change? What about organisations going through change?
Oh, there's huge insight, and it starts with busting the conventional myth that people resist change. You've probably heard that a number of times, and that's quite a burden that managers and leaders get lumbered with. If we look through the lens of human instincts, we clearly see that as a species we can't possibly be wired to resist change. If we were, we'd be still living in caves. As humans, we're very happy with change, provided it covers one of these 9 instincts, and that instinct is that it avoids loss. That the change for me, it might be a restructure, it might be a relocation, it might be a new software technology, and what I'm screening for is to instantly know what that means to me, and does it involve loss? Loss is a greater motivator than gain, and so I'm not actually screening for gain. But if I learn, when I hear about that change, that change for me is good, I might get a promotion out of the restructure, then don't tell me that's a bad change. If I instantly know that it's loss, well, I clearly classify it accurately as loss. The big swinger is that if at the first moment when I hear about the change, I don't know how it's going to affect me, then invariably I will err on the side of the negative.
Okay, I like that. That's really nice. People don't resist change, they resist loss. That's quite empowering because that then helps us restructure our message and perhaps our whole change approach.
Well, it does, and it also makes a huge difference to the way executives approach change, and the way they position it, the way they communicate it, the way they think about it, the way they handle people's responses.
So who are the organisations who are implementing this, and what results are they getting?
Well, one is Philips, in terms of, so talking about change management. So Philips was about to implement a restructure and brought their leaders to the zoo. And so while at the zoo, getting across human instincts, we then workshopped the change, and it was rolled out, and to quote the MD and the HR director, better than any change they've done in the past. So that's one. Thales, the global engineering firm, applies human instincts around change management and HR practices. Another example, no credit to me, Flight Centre. I say no credit to me because their chief executive was inspired by Nigel Nicholson's work 13 years ago, the same time as I was, and they rolled out a structure called families, villages and tribes. And so when people go past a Flight Centre store next and look in the window, you'll see no more than 7 staff operating that store.
Andrew, we face a lot of complex problems. You know, there's drugs, there's arms trafficking, there's war, there's corrupt governments, poverty, pandemics, population growth, sustainability, to name but a few. What is it that Hardwired Humans has to offer civilization, has to offer humanity, and perhaps even the planet?
I think my contribution might be a little modest according to that phenomenal list, but I hope to make an impact on this building block that we have in our societies of organisations. And a lot of people in a lot of organisations find that they're somewhat dysfunctional and they're somewhat suppressive in terms of places to spend our day. And the aim of knowing about human instincts is twofold. One, that we then bring into consciousness what it is to be natural and to construct our organisations naturally. And as a consequence of that, then leaders can make some good informed choices.
Couple of things are for sure. Solving these complex problems are going to take enlightened organisations led by enlightened leaders, and dysfunction and suppression ain't going to help. Andrew O'Keefe has made a wonderful contribution with his work and book, Hardwired Humans, and I would strongly recommend Andrew to anyone who needs to get things done through others. Andrew O'Keefe, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rod.